A sharp cry tore through the salty dawn air. The wind howled across the deserted shore, stirring broken pieces of driftwood and shredded palm leaves. Gulls screamed above, wheeling in tight circles, their cries echoing across the sea. Something had washed ashore. Something not of this land. Two boys lay sprawled on the wet sand, half buried by waves, unconscious, barely alive. The tide curled around their bodies like a whispering spirit. One of them stirred, his chest rising, his mouth gasping. The other groaned in pain, rolling over slowly, blinking against the sun. But what caught their blurry eyes next stole their breath. A circle of women, dozens of them, stood silent and unmoving. Tall and strong, their eyes wide and alert, their faces expressionless. Spears carved from bone and wood rested in their hands. Their dark braided hair glinted with beads and feathers shining in the light. They wore garments of bark cloth, dyed in earthen reds and forest greens. The taller boy Thibaut struggled to sit up, coughing up seawater, his arms shaking. His eyes flicked around, confused by the silence. He rasped, Is this Itoba Island?" Still the women said nothing. Their silence pressed into him like stone. Thibaut came from a small, sun-soaked town called Kiwala, nestled by the Odo River, where fishmongers sang in the morning and children chased goats through alleys. The smell of wood smoke and boiling cassava was everywhere. He lived with his mother, Mama Ebele, a strong, broad-shouldered woman who stitched clothing by day and whispered prayers to her ancestors by night. He had no siblings, just old memories and one fading photograph of a smiling man, his father. At 17, Thibaut had the lean build of someone who grew up climbing trees and running barefoot across cracked soil. His fingers were calloused from hammering iron in the forge of Papa Kunle, the village blacksmith, but his eyes held the hunger of the stars. He loved maps. He drew them, studied them, and sometimes dreamed himself into them. His little room was filled with yellowing pages and scribbled lines, imaginary rivers and real ones. But one map haunted him most, the one his father had followed. 10 years ago, Jerome Dogo, his father, vanished, an explorer, a dreamer. Some said he found Ukehara, the legendary forest of women said to guard a magical seed that could stretch life far beyond normal years. Others whispered that he was seduced by the beauty of the guardians and chose to stay forever. No one knew. He never came back. Thibaut was 7 when the news crackled from their old radio. His mother dropped it in shock. For days she wailed. Then the wailing stopped. So did the stories. But Thibaut kept searching. One evening the radio buzzed again with a voice that made his blood run hot. Chief Abade, a wealthy elder from the capital, had launched yet another expedition to find the forest. He wanted immortality. Thibaut clenched his fists. This wasn't about magic. It was about answers. At sunrise, he packed his rucksack with dried plantain, 2 flasks of water, a notebook and his father's pendant. He headed to the port. There on the wooden jetty stood Gaji, his childhood friend, wide-chested and full of stories. Gaji claimed to have trained with the Bayor Navy Scouts, though Thibaut suspected most of it was bluff. "So it's true?" Gaji said, biting into sugarcane. "You're really going after ghosts?" "Not ghosts," Thibaut replied. "Just one man, my father." They boarded the creaking ship under Chief Abade's banner. A guard handed them a blinking compass-like device. "Track your path, do not lose it." The sea welcomed them with gentle winds, but soon it grew rough. Days stretched into weeks. Hope faded, food dwindled. Gaji cursed the compass, flinging it against the mast. "It's cursed, I swear." But Thibaut said nothing. He watched the stars like his father once did. Then came the birds, hundreds of them flying low. Thibaut felt a warm splash on his face. He sniffed. "Bird droppings, we're close." He grabbed the spyglass. A distant line of green shimmered on the horizon. They cheered, but joy turned to dread. The waves rose like giants. The ship shattered on unseen rocks. Thibaut remembered nothing but water, salt, and the scream of wood breaking. Now on the shore, the women tied their hands with vines that smelled of sap and rain. Their grip was firm, but not cruel. They marched the boys through thick forest. vines draping like curtains, trees ancient and twisted, flowers glowing faintly in the underbrush. The village emerged like a dream. Domed huts of woven reeds sat in rings around fire pits. Smoke curled into the sky. Wooden carvings of animals and ancestors lined the paths. A warrior shoved Gaji forward. He puffed his chest and muttered a joke in broken dialect. A tall woman stepped forward. Without a word, she struck him with the blunt end of her staff. Gaji yelped, tumbling into the dirt. The women locked them inside a large wooden cage woven from roots, set near a stream. Darkness came, and then she came, Queen Zariba. Her presence filled the clearing. Her skin shimmered like riverstone. Her eyes were the color of burnt copper. She wore a cloak made from gazelle hide and rings of bronze around her wrists. Few. Cross our border, she said. Fewer leave. Gaji smirked. You need a better tourism plan. She stared at him like he was a stone in her path. Then she turned and vanished. Later that night, as the fireflies danced above, inside their prison cage, woven tightly from twisted roots and lashed with vines, the air was damp and thick with the scent of moss. Moonlight filtered through the canopy above, casting stripes of silver on the forest floor. Tebo sat with his back pressed against the rough wooden bars, hands trembling slightly. Across from him, Gaji sulked quietly, massaging the bruise on his temple. We can't wait for them to make a decision, Tebo muttered. You saw how they looked. At us, they want us gone. Gaji sighed. Unless you plan on growing wings, I don't see how we leave. But Tebo wasn't listening anymore. He reached under his waistband and pulled out a small blade, barely the size of his palm. The steel was rusted, but still sharp enough to cut. He had hidden it in the hem of his tunic, a keepsake from his father. He turned to a loose patch of the cage wall. Help me. Keep watch. Together, in complete silence, they began. The blade whispered against the wood. Each stroke chipped away bark and tension. Tebo worked slowly, patiently, making sure not to snap a twig or alert the guards stationed nearby. Every few moments he paused to listen. Crickets, wind, distant drums, but no footsteps. Gaji shifted the vines gently aside as Tebo continued cutting. Sweat beaded down their foreheads, mingling with the dust and the sharp scent of resin. One thick root took longer. Tebo gritted his teeth and pressed harder. The blade slipped, slicing the edge of his palm. He stifled a gasp. Blood trickled. He wiped it on his shirt and resumed. You're bleeding, Gaji whispered. Doesn't matter, Tebo replied. Almost there. A final cut. The last vine fell away. The gap was barely wide enough for a child, but they pushed through one by one, crawling into the underbrush like frightened animals. They crouched in the shadows beyond the cage, heartbeat matching the pulse of the drums echoing in the village square. Split up, Tebo whispered. We cover more ground. I'll look for clues about the tribe. You find a path out. Gaji hesitated. Don't get caught. You either. And just like that, they vanished into the jungle night. Gaji ran into the jungle. Tebo hesitated. Something tugged at him. A need to know, a need to see. Instead of fleeing, he crept toward the village center. He passed quiet huts, their doors covered with dyed cloth. The scent of shea butter and dried herbs filled the air. He stepped into a hut whose entrance was partly veiled in dried palm leaves. Inside was a musky scent of crushed herbs and clay. He scanned the room, noticing finely carved combs, bowls filled with powders and robes folded neatly on the floor. Before he could slip back out, the curtain fluttered. Two women stepped inside. One was Yaluma, the soft-eyed girl he'd seen earlier, now humming a gentle tune as she let down her braided hair. She carried a wooden bowl of water. The other, her older sister Duma, had sharp features and a commanding stride. Yaluma began to unfasten the strings of her bark cloth wrap, unaware of the intruder crouched in shadow. Tebo froze. His throat tightened. He dared not move lest a branch crack or cloth rustle, but his foot shifted, a tiny sound, a breath of a noise. Duma turned. Her eyes locked onto Tebo's in an instant, her face transformed with rage. Before she could shout, Tebo raised both hands. Please, I didn't mean... Too late. Duma grabbed a nearby pestle and lunged. He ducked and stumbled backward. Yaluma shrieked. The alarm echoed through the village like a war horn. Drums thundered. Torches flared. Spears were drawn. Tibo ran, barefoot, heart-pounding, dodging through huts and leaping over baskets. Women poured from every direction, shouting, their eyes blazing. He slipped past the fire pit, tried to hide behind the storyteller's platform, but a net fell over him. He struggled like a caught goat, but was pulled to the ground. Within moments, Gaji was dragged in too, bruised and limping. He had tried to bluff his way through the guards, claiming to be a mighty hunter trained in the ways of jungle combat. The women were not amused. They beat him again, this time harder. The queen arrived, her face etched with deep anger. You broke free from our cage. You spied on our sacred bath. You invaded our trust. Gaji raised his hands. It wasn't me. I didn't see anything. The queen ignored him. In our land, being seen unclothed by a man brings a curse of decay. It marks a woman's spirit. It makes her ugly to the gods. The warriors encircled the boys. One sharpened a long wooden skewer. Another began fanning. Flames beneath two enormous hollowed logs. Tibo and Gaji were tied and lowered into separate barrels. Are we being marinated? Gaji croaked, panic in his voice. Then came a familiar voice. Wait. It was Yaluma. Her face was flushed. Her breath shaky. She marched up to the queen, then turned to Tibo. You saw me. That shame is mine to carry, but I don't want him to die. The queen's gaze softened, but only a little. Yaluma drew a knife. The crowd gasped. She stepped toward Tibo. He stared at the glinting blade, heart frozen. But instead of stabbing, she sliced the rope binding his arms. Then she cut Gaji free. Go, she whispered, before I change my mind. Tibo locked eyes with her for a breath too long. Then he grabbed Gaji, and the two sprinted into the jungle, barefoot, bloodied, and barely breathing. But Ukehara was no friend of the uninvited. They ran through tangled vines and thick moss, only to fall into another trap, a pit laced with thorny roots. Morning came, the sun rose, and once again they were tied and dragged before the village. But this time it was worse. The sacred tree, the one glowing softly in the heart of the village, was blackened, burned, charred bark curled like old paper. You brought fire upon our soul, a warrior cried. The queen was trembling with fury. Prepare the oils. Roast them. Both. The women gathered herbs, wrapped the boys in banana leaves. Fires were lit. Just then, a scream from the shore. Help! Zula! She's drowning! Every head turned. A woman had been swept into the sea. She flailed, disappearing under the waves. The villagers panicked. No one moved. Tibo and Gaji looked at each other. Without a word, Tibo twisted, rubbed his bonds against a broken spear tip, and freed himself. He pulled Gaji loose. They didn't run. They ran toward the water. Tibo dove in first. The sea was rough, and Zula was slipping deeper. He fought through currents, lungs screaming, until he reached her. He pulled her to the shore. There, Gaji pressed his palms to her chest. Breathe! Come on! Nothing. He pumped again. Zula gasped. The village fell silent. Then erupted into cheers. Women cried. Drums were struck. The queen herself stepped forward. Zula clutched Gaji's arm. They saved me. The queen's expression wavered. She turned away for a long moment, but before she could speak, a scout rushed in. The tree is dead. They are the cause. The celebration stopped. Ashes floated from the sacred tree. The queen's voice turned cold. They must die. Again. Wait, said Yaluma. Give them one chance. Let them restore what they destroyed. Zula nodded. 3 moons. No more. The queen narrowed her eyes. 3 moons. If the tree does not rise, again so shall their bones feed the roots. The next days were strange. The villagers watched with suspicion but did not interfere. Tibo and Gaji cleaned the charred bark with palm oil and clay. They fetched water in carved gourds, mixing it with crushed leaves believed to awaken life. Gaji, once brash, now helped mend nets and carry yams. He tried to impress Zula with clumsy dances and gave her hibiscus flowers. Thibaut spent quiet hours sketching the tree, studying its grooves, whispering apologies to the earth. One afternoon he saw something move, behind Yaluma, a viper. He lunged, scooping her away as the snake hissed. They tumbled to the ground. She blinked, startled. "Thank you," she said. "It was going to bite you." She smiled. "That's my pet." They both laughed. For the first time, it didn't feel like they were from different worlds. Weeks passed. One morning, a soft green bud pushed from the tree's base. A cheer echoed through the forest. That night, a feast was held. Drums thundered. Calabashes of palm wine passed from hand to hand. Dancers spun in the firelight. Thibaut watched Yaluma dance, her movements fluid like river water. He turned to Gaji. "You know what my father wrote in his last letter? That life isn't about how long you live, but what you're willing to protect." Gaji nodded, eyes on Zula. "I think we've found something worth protecting." And under the glowing light of the reborn tree, the two boys, once strangers, were no longer outsiders. For the first time, Ukehara called them kin. Thibaut sat by the sacred tree, its bark blackened but slowly healing, green buds timidly pushing, through like hope. He watched Yaluma laugh with children, the sun catching the gold in her eyes. Something stirred in his chest, a realization. He had come in search of his father. Instead, he found something else, a reason, a purpose. He whispered to the wind as if speaking to a spirit. "I was lucky to find this place and to find her, and if I must protect it, so be it." Later that night, under the glow of fireflies and starlight, Yaluma sat beside him and shared a story. "There was once a tribe," she began, her voice soft and steady. "From the old days, before empires, before iron tools. They were known as the Enosi, the womb of the earth. The world called them witches, but they were women of wisdom." She described their way of life, how they lived in harmony with animals and plants, how they spoke to rivers and danced with trees. They didn't need men to survive. Through Parthenia, a miracle of nature, they birthed daughters without needing a father. Sons were rare, but when born, they were gentle seers, protectors, never rulers. "They guarded a seed," Yaluma said, pulling a polished stone from her pouch. "It came from the mouth of a fallen star. They say it held the rhythm of life itself, the power to slow time, to heal. As men grew more powerful, they became afraid of what they couldn't control, jealous of what they couldn't possess. So, they hunted us." The word was cold. "One night they came with fire and blades. My great-grandmother, barely more than a girl, watched them slaughter her kin. Her mother gave her the seed and told her to run, far from the blood. She ran until the world ended, and when she woke up, this island had grown beneath her feet. That girl became Queen Zariah," Yaluma said, "the very same woman who ruled Ukehara now. We are the last of the Enosi, and we must protect the seed, not for ourselves but for the world." Thibaut didn't speak for a long time. The next morning, Yaluma led him through a trail overgrown with moss and silence. They reached a grove where the wind seemed to stop moving. She pointed to a patch of carved stone. A satchel lay hidden under roots. Inside, an old, leather-bound journal. Thibaut trembled. He opened it. The pages smelled of salt and smoke. The handwriting was rugged but familiar. It was his father's. He read, "I have seen the heart of the earth. The Enosi welcomed me not with fear, but with kindness. Their eyes held stars. Their spirits were old. They are not witches. They are the guardians of balance." Thibaut flipped the pages. His father described rituals, meals, laughter. The women had offered him sanctuary, but he knew others would follow. Greedy men with sharp shoes and sharper ambitions. "I couldn't lead them here," Jeroma wrote. "I chose silence. I chose to vanish so the world could live on in peace. If my son finds this, I hope he understands." Thibaut pressed the book to his chest. He understood. And with heavy resolve, he walked back to the campfire, took the blinking GPS tracker from Gaji's belt, and crushed it under his heel. But then, beep. His heart sank. The light blinked again. In the faraway capital, the signal had reached. Obade! They sprinted to Queen Zariah. breathless, desperate. "He's coming," Thibaut gasped. "Hobade, he knows." The queen's face hardened. "Then we prepare." They crafted a plan. The women would not meet force with force. They would lure, confuse, and scatter. Hours later, Obade's ship sliced through the waves. His men disembarked, rifles slung and boots trampling the sacred sands. But the village waited, not with spears, but with smiles. The men saw beauty, not danger. They accepted palm wine, sat near fires, laughed with women who giggled and offered roasted yams. Then, thud. One by one they fell, drugged, knocked cold. Obade, growing suspicious, ventured in himself. Thibaut and Gaji greeted him at the boundary. "You've made a mistake," Thibaut said. "This is not what you think." Obade's eyes were cold. "Tie them, all of them." The warriors grabbed everyone, even the queen, even the elders. Obade raised a silver blade. "Where's the seed?" Queen Zariah said nothing. He grabbed Yaluma, placing the blade near her throat. "Then she dies." The queen relented. "I will take you." They walked deep into the jungle. But the women had planned for this too. A woman, quiet and strong, struck one of the guards with a stone. Chaos erupted. Spears flew. Drums roared. In the confusion, Obade seized Thibaut and dragged him away. They reached the cliff's edge. Waves crashed below. Obade tied Thibaut's hands. "Tell me the secret or I throw you." Thibaut stared at the sea. Behind them, Gaji and the women arrived. Obade turned, weapon raised. Then Thibaut lunged. He grabbed Obade and dove. The sea swallowed them both. Underwater they fought, hands clawing, lungs burning. But Thibaut thought only of the seed, of Yaluma's eyes, of his father's sacrifice. He would do the same. The ocean went black. Silence. Screams echoed from above. Gaji fell to his knees. Yaluma collapsed, weeping. The island mourned. Days passed. Then, a shadow stirred near the shore. From the surf, a figure emerged. Thibaut, alive. The village exploded with joy. Women sang. Children danced. Even Queen Zariah smiled, rare and soft. Gaji ran forward and hugged his brother in arms. Yaluma wept. They didn't know what force brought him back. Was it the island, the seed, the ancestors? But they knew why. Because Thibaut had given everything for something greater than himself. And in that act, the forest of women for the first time opened its arms to a man. In a world chasing power, sometimes the greatest strength lies in protecting what is gentle, sacred, and unseen. Thibaut learned that legacy isn't just about blood. It's about the choices we make, the lives we touch, and the courage to stand between greed and grace. If this story stirred your heart, don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who cherishes folktales, and leave a comment telling us where you're watching from. For more timeless stories rooted in African soil and soul, subscribe and journey with us again.